Right now, President Obama coming out swinging during a wide-ranging press conference today. Nothing off the table, talking about everything from flight delays to Gitmo. We'll cover and tell you what you need to know. And next, what happens after a pro athlete comes out of the closet? Apparently, guys lavished with praise and accolades. We're going to have Jason Collins' surprisingly unconventional coming out. And later, our interview with Republican mayoral hopeful Joe Lhota. Some call him Giuliani the sequel. He says that's just fine by him. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us this Tuesday evening, April 30th. Now, we're going to start here with headlines, and they come from the president's press conference this morning. And we get more on that from Andrew Whitman, senior political correspondent.
And Rich, the press conference ranged through a number of topics. Topic number one, the sequester and a budget cut that finally pushed Congress into action. Specifically, flight delays, thousands of them after sequester mandated cuts led to the furlough of 15,000 air traffic controllers, and that led to lengthy delays at airports. So quietly, late last week, Congress passed a bill allowing the FAA to take $250 million slated for airport improvement funds and use it to get the controllers back on the job. The votes, 361 to 41 in the House, and a unanimous okay from the Senate. The reaction? Joy from flyers and from members of Congress who cast that vote just before they flew home to their districts, and complaints from others who argued that fixing just the flight delays takes the sting out of the sequester that all Americans were supposed to share, and calls for the president to veto the deal. Today he explained why he would not.
If I were to veto, for example, this FAA bill, that somehow would lead to the broader fix. It just means that there'd be pain now, which they would try to blame on me, as opposed to pain 5 years from now. But either way, the problem's not getting fixed.
Mr. Obama later attacked congressional Republicans who mocked his warnings about the sequester impact, while pointing out that a lot of Americans are still being hurt harder by the sequester than those people just inconvenienced by flight delays. So even though the flight delay problems appear to have been solved, the sequester is still cutting nearly $1 billion from FEMA and from Sandy Aid. It's cutting food assistance for senior citizens. It's cutting unemployment checks for those most in need. Also cut by the sequester, medical research for AIDS and cancer and more. Head Start programs for thousands of preschoolers, help for the disabled and young families on their rents, aid for and grants for college students, workplace safety inspections, even childcare, and help for low-income families on their heating and cooling bills. But at least the lines at the airport will move faster. Rich?
All right, Andrew, I see a sense of snarkiness on that one. Let's bring in our panel on this. Former Republican congressman from the great state of Connecticut and distinguished fellow in public service at the University of New Haven. I think they're called the Hawks, right? Okay. Chris Chase, Dominic Carter. See, once I go on script, I get in trouble. Political journalist, author, Thassis Michael, political strategist and professor at Columbia University at the Lions.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I could have said anything. You said yes. And you met Andrew. Okay. Andrew, the takeaway is, and the president forced to answer this today, nobody wants delays. Nobody thought it made sense to take the controllers off the job. But why do that there and not do some of the other things you talked about, right?
Well, remember, the sequester was supposed to be this big, painful thing that was going to impact everybody. That's why neither party wanted the sequester. Now you're removing some of the pain that targets a few people, but you're leaving the pain for a lot of people.
A lot of people fly.
It's, you know what, how many people have flown in the last 2 weeks? It's a pretty small percentage of the population.
Well, I mean, I understand why it's a good vote, Congressman.
He amazes me. It wasn't to be painful. It was to get our country's financial house in order. It's a 2.5% cut overall in your entire budget. If you then say, well, it's only in half the budget, then it's like a 5% cut. A 5% cut on the increase, I mean, the budget's still going to go up. And if we can't deal with this, what can we deal with?
But the question is a different one. Let's say you're right to say, listen, we should be able to suffer it. Then why not keep the cuts with the FAA?
Why is 5.5% suffering? It's because they chose the most sensitive parts. Why not have a president who has all these people running the government say, I'd like to move my budget here, here, and here, and we don't have to have expenditures here. There are just ways that you don't have to spend money. I mean, good grief. You learn about the potential bomber and terrorists and how much aid they got from the United States. Why are we looking at things that matter?
Basil?
Well, when is a sequester not a sequester? When you're starting to, actually put back programs in place that you had originally cut because there's a squeaky wheel somewhere. So the question is, who gets priority and when, and who's first in that line? Look, I had a student who told me yesterday that she was delayed in Buffalo because of the sequester, and I think the airline actually made that announcement at the airport. But I will say, going back to the point about some of these losses, I mean, if you're wondering who has flown or who hasn't flown in the last 2 weeks, people that have difficulty getting childcare, people who are unemployed, people who are underemployed. There are a lot of folks that are really suffering right now who have not flown in the last couple of weeks, so they will not feel the impact of the rolling back of the flight controllers, but they're still suffering. So what are we going to do for them? And so that's really my biggest concern. Whether the sequester was meant to be actually fix the budget, or there's really more of a punitive effect of this sequester. I actually don't think it goes anywhere towards solving any problem that we have right now.
Politically, did the president make the right decision, Dominic? In terms of going along to get along here on...
Well, what's floating through my mind is, one, the congressman is right. We have to get our financial house in order. But two, you can't have airports with 3 and 4 and 5 hour delays. I mean, you've got to rob Peter to pay Paul to fix it. But the big headline is going to be, you've asked this question over and over when he was first reelected, and that was, how much is he going to be how long before he's a lame duck? And the president answered that today. That's the big headline out of today.
And there's other sounds, right? So I want to get your reaction to it. Another issue the president hit on today was the Boston bombings. The congressman obviously referenced, and whether our intelligence agencies dropped the ball before the attacks. Now, there are reports that Russia warned the FBI that the older bombing suspect of the two brothers had become more radicalized, and that the feds conducted a low-level check on him but didn't press on. That has led to criticism like this.
It's a failure to share information and missing obvious warning signs. We're going back to the pre-9/11 stovepiping.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina, said in so many words, or in these exact words, that the FBI dropped the ball. Well, today, the president was asked about it, and he responded like this.
It's not as if the FBI did nothing. They not only investigated the older brother, they interviewed the older brother.
From what you know, Congressman, about what the FBI knew and what they were able to, effectuate, are people expecting too much out of them, or did they drop the ball in the case of the Boston bombs?
I think they're expecting too much out of them. I mean, every day they're being told about more people than they can check. Did someone fail? Yes, someone did fail, and they've got to figure out who should have done a better job, so that person learns and does a better job. I can assure you that anything now that we're getting from the Russians, we're probably double checking and triple checking. One of the problems I do think, though, was because it was Chechnya, because we have a little bit of suspicion about the Russians, we almost think those people are freedom fighters because they were fighting the Russians. And no, they were terrorists, and we should have paid more attention. But I don't fault the FBI.
Okay.
But what I do want to say is,
yes,
tell me why a 5% cut is painful. That's the absurdity to the last one. I just have to get it.
It's painful when you're waiting 5 hours to clear security at the airport.
It's painful because the bureaucrats aren't cutting where they need to cut.
Okay, I'll grant you
But
that.
isn't that also in the eye of the beholder where you cut? Because Republicans said defense had to be off the table, remember? And then Democrats said, well, certain programs had to be exempt from it.
Well,
it wasn't that the pain was completely...
Defense isn't off the table, though.
I know that. But remember the original fights were that both parties wanted to exempt certain areas.
Do you think we need all the tanks that we're getting for the military?
Apparently not, if you listen to the military
No,
right now,
right,
but Congress still wants to give it to them.
Well, but that's my point. There are places that we can cut. And so the sequester should force us to now look at where we need to cut.
Well, maybe, arguably, the most surprising headline that came from the press conference with the president today was in a subject that a lot of people thought was long settled. That had to do with the terror prison at Guantanamo Bay. Listen to what the president had to say.
Guantanamo is not necessary to keep America safe. It is expensive. It is inefficient. It hurts us in terms of our international standing. It lessens cooperation with our allies on counterterrorism efforts. It is a recruitment tool for extremists. It needs to be closed.
So many may ask, what is stopping the president then? In 2009, Congress passed a law blocking the transfer of Gitmo detainees to American prisons. Now, the 166 detainees still at Gitmo, more than 100 refusing to eat and are being force-fed. 86 have been approved for release, but there are fears that they are now too radicalized to now release. U.S. spends more than $150 million a year to operate Gitmo. And Andrew, we both know there are questions that you have to answer and can choose to answer. A lot of people were surprised how vocal the president was on this answer when it wasn't certainly in the headlines.
Well, he had campaigned on trying to close Gitmo, but as soon as he was elected, it was like Congress slammed the door on him, and it was a bipartisan vote. There were Democrats who voted this way also, to basically keep Gitmo open indefinitely. It raises a whole host of legal problems. It raises the question, as the president posed, as to whether it's actually harming the United States by keeping people there. It just didn't seem like there was a lot of political momentum or room for the president to make a change on this. So that's why it caught me off guard, and I'm sure others, why he would bring it up and emphasize it today.
No, I absolutely agree. I think he campaigned on this. This is something that I think a lot of folks to his left were calling for, and I am shocked that it's actually come up again, because even in my mind I said, wow, I haven't actually thought about this in quite some time. And I haven't heard anything on the left about it for quite some time either.
Well, to that point, Dom, to me, maybe I'm thinking about too much in political numbers here, but post-Boston, this isn't exactly the headline you want to make, shut down Gitmo, even though I practically think the answer makes sense, and forgetting all the legal issues and precedents that Gitmo has raised. To me, I didn't know, I was a little surprised he went as strong as he did today.
Well, I believe a reporter asked him about the topic.
It's not that he volunteered, but he could have answered it with an unanswered.
He could have punted on the question. I mean, the question is, if you do close it, where do they go? What's going to happen? But you're right, in light of Boston, this is the last thing that the president needs to be talking about right now.
Are you surprised it's still open at this point?
No, I'm not surprised at all, because the president learned something when he became president. There really aren't alternatives. You don't want all these folks spread out throughout the United States. These are not good people.
100 that were cleared for release.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot of them that have been cleared for release, but then the fear is that it would be too dangerous to send them to Yemen or to send them back wherever it is that we got them from, and those fears, you can't leave them in Gitmo, you can't send them home, you can't bring them to the United States. What are you going to wind up doing? The one common theme throughout most of these comments from the president today, though, was this is why I disagree with what Congress is doing or not doing. You start to see the beginnings of the 2014 midterm election here, the president trying to draw divisions between his positions and Republicans in Congress.
We're going to talk later in the program about one of those issues as it relates to background checks and some fascinating polls, I think, about where the public feels for how some of those lawmakers voted or didn't vote for that. Okay, but when we come back, a major headline that came up yesterday, and it's got a lot of people talking, not just in the sports world. What happens when a pro athlete in one of the big four sports, a male athlete, comes out of the closet? We're going to have what, for many, has been a surprisingly, amazingly welcoming aftermath of the Jason Collins coming out. We'll also talk to somebody who's made this a life mission after this break. Stay with us.